The first thing I noticed was the smell of lavender and sweat. It was 5:47 in the morning, and I was walking down the gravel path toward the old dairy parlor, with a thermos of black coffee in my hand, still half asleep, still trying to figure out why the motion light on the east side of the barn had tripped at 4:30. The sun wasn't even fully up yet. The sky was that pale gray color that happens right before dawn breaks over the valley, and the grass was wet with dew, and my boots were making that soft crunching sound on the gravel that I've heard 10,000 times since I was old enough to walk. I rounded the corner past the tractor shed, and that's when I saw them. Cars. 6 of them. Parked in a neat row, along the fence line where I usually stack hay bales. A white Subaru, a silver Prius, a black Honda CR-V, a blue Tesla, a red Mini Cooper, and a gray Lexus SUV that I recognized immediately because it belonged to Patricia Calloway, the president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association Wellness Committee. I stopped walking. I set my thermos down on the hood of my old Ford truck. I blinked a few times because for a second I thought I was still dreaming, still back in my bed, still imagining things. But the cars were real. The lavender smell was real. And when I pushed open the side door of the dairy parlor, the sight that greeted me was something I will never forget for the rest of my life. There were 23 people inside my building. 23 people in yoga pants and tank tops and bare feet, arranged in 4 neat rows on purple and blue yoga mats. Their eyes closed, their hands pressed together in front of their chests, their breathing slow and synchronized. At the front of the room, standing on a small wooden platform that I had built 3 years ago for equipment demonstrations, was a woman I had never seen before. She was tall and slender, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, wearing white leggings and a pale green top that said, Oak Haven Wellness, in silver letters across the chest. She was leading the class through some kind of breathing exercise, her voice soft and melodic, her arms moving in slow, graceful arcs. And standing off to the side, near my milking equipment, near the stainless steel buckets and the old pasteurizer and the feed charts that my grandfather had handwritten 40 years ago, was Patricia Calloway herself. She was holding a clipboard, she was smiling, she was collecting money. I stood there in the doorway for a full 30 seconds before anyone noticed me. The yoga instructor kept talking about opening heart chakras. The participants kept breathing. Patricia kept counting cash, and I kept staring at the yoga mats that were spread out across my concrete floor, right next to my farm equipment, right next to the storage shelves where I kept veterinary supplies and fencing tools and bags of mineral supplement for the herd. Finally, the woman on the mat closest to the door opened her eyes. She was maybe 50 years old, with short gray hair and a confused expression. She looked at me, looked at my boots, looked at my coffee thermos, and said, "Are you here for the sunrise session? It's $25 for drop-ins." I didn't answer her. I looked directly at Patricia Calloway. I said, "Patricia, what is happening in my dairy parlor?" Patricia looked up from her clipboard. Her smile didn't waver. Her expression didn't change. She just tilted her head slightly, the way a teacher might tilt her head at a student who has asked a very silly question. And she said, "Good morning, Marcus. We're just finishing the first session. The next one starts at 7 if you'd like to join. I can offer you the resident discount." The resident discount. In my own building, on my own farm, that my grandfather built with his own hands in 1963. I didn't say anything else. I turned around, walked back outside, picked up my thermos, and stood there in the gray morning light, listening to the sound of 23 people exhaling in unison. And I thought about the document that was sitting in my filing cabinet. The agricultural use permit, the one that had been attached to this property since before the HOA existed, since before the subdivision was built, since before Patricia Calloway had ever set foot in this county. She had no idea what she had just done. She had no idea that the document sitting in my filing cabinet would end her entire wellness empire. Before I explain what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's out there listening to this story. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 42 years old, and I own 160 acres of farmland in what used to be unincorporated county territory, before the Oak Haven Estates development swallowed up the old Henderson Place and the Miller Orchard, and about 3,000 acres of what used to be working agricultural land. I've lived on this farm my entire life. My grandfather, Samuel Webb, bought the original 80 acres in 1958, right after he got out of the service, and he built the dairy operation from scratch. He poured the concrete for the milking parlor himself. He welded the stanchions. He ran the electrical. He kept handwritten records of every cow, every gallon of milk, every dollar earned and spent, for 47 years. My father took over in the early 2000s, and I took over after him, and for the past 12 years I've been running a small grass-fed beef operation with about 60 head of cattle, plus some hay production, and a little bit of custom equipment work for the neighboring farms that are still hanging on. The dairy parlor hasn't been used for actual milking since 2009, when the milk prices collapsed and my father made the decision to transition to beef. But the building is still solid. The concrete is still good. The roof is still tight. I use it for equipment storage, for veterinary work, for the monthly farm workshops I host for the county extension office, and for the annual 4-H meeting that my daughter Lily has been part of since she was 9 years old. Lily is 14 now. She's the reason I get up every morning. Her mother, my wife Elena, passed away from cancer 4 years ago. And since then, it's just been me and Lily and the cattle and the memory of everything this farm has meant to 3 generations of Webbs. The farm is not just my job. It's not just my property. It's the physical manifestation of my family's entire history. Every fence post, every gate hinge, every piece of equipment, every handwritten note in my grandfather's ledger books. It all matters to me in a way that I can't fully explain to people who didn't grow up with dirt under their fingernails and the smell of silage in their clothes. When Elena was sick in those last months, she told me to keep the farm going. She told me to make sure Lily understood what it meant. She told me to protect it. I promised her I would. I didn't know at the time that protecting it would mean going to war with a yoga instructor and a wellness committee and the entire Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. The Oak Haven Estates development went in about 8 years ago, on the other side of the old county road that runs along my eastern property line. It's one of those planned communities with a fancy entrance gate and landscaped medians and street names like Tranquility Lane and Serenity Court and Wellness Way. The houses are big and beige and mostly identical, with 3-car garages and manicured lawns and HOA fees that are higher than my monthly equipment payment. I never paid much attention to the development. It was on the other side of the road. It wasn't my land. It wasn't my business. The HOA had its rules and its covenants and its architectural review committee, and I had my cattle and my hay fields and my 160 acres of agricultural zoning. Our worlds didn't overlap, or at least they didn't overlap until Patricia Calloway decided that my dairy parlor would make a perfect rustic yoga studio. Patricia Calloway moved into Oak Haven Estates about 3 years ago. She's in her late 50s, divorced, wealthy from what I understand, and she runs the HOA Wellness Committee like it's a Fortune 500 company. She wears expensive athleisure clothing. She drives a gray Lexus SUV. She carries a clipboard everywhere she goes. She has a way of speaking that sounds friendly and reasonable on the surface, but if you listen carefully, you can hear the steel underneath. The absolute certainty that she knows what's best for everyone, and that anyone who disagrees with her is simply confused or misinformed or not yet educated about the benefits of whatever she's proposing. I had met her exactly twice before the yoga incident. The first time was at a county planning meeting about road maintenance, where she had argued that the county should install speed bumps on the road in front of the development because residents were concerned about farm equipment creating traffic hazards. I had pointed out that farm equipment had been using that road since before the development existed, and that the speed limit was already 35 miles per hour, and that maybe the residents should just slow down. She had smiled at me the same way she smiled at me in the dairy parlor, that patient teacher smile, and she had said, "I understand your perspective, Marcus, but we have to think about community safety." The second time was about 6 months later, when she had knocked on my front door and asked if I would be interested in selling a strip of land along the eastern boundary so the HOA could build a walking trail that connected to the development's green space. I had told her no. I had told her that the land was part of my grazing rotation and that I wasn't interested in selling. She had nodded, made a note on her clipboard, and said, "Well, if you change your mind, the offer stands. We're building a community here, Marcus. It would be nice if you were part of it." I had thanked her for the offer and closed the door. That was the extent of our relationship before the morning of the yoga mats. So when I walked into my dairy parlor at 5:47 in the morning and found 23 people doing sun salutations next to my cattle equipment, I was genuinely confused. I didn't understand how it had happened. I didn't understand why anyone would think it was okay. I didn't understand how Patricia Calloway had gotten into the building in the first place. The dairy parlor has a lock on the door. It's not a fancy lock. It's just a standard padlock on a hasp, the same kind of lock that farmers have been using for 100 years. But it was locked when I left the building the previous evening. I know it was locked, because I locked it myself after I finished organizing the veterinary supplies for the herd check that was scheduled for the following week. So when I walked back to the dairy parlor after the yoga class ended, after the participants had rolled up their mats and put on their shoes and driven away in their 6 cars, I checked the lock. It was hanging open on the hasp. It hadn't been cut. It hadn't been broken. It had been opened with a key. I didn't have time to process that information immediately, because Patricia Calloway was walking toward me across the gravel, her clipboard tucked under her arm, her smile still firmly in place. "Marcus, I'm so glad you stopped by this morning," she said. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the wellness initiative. The response has been incredible. We had 47 signups for the Sunrise series, and we've only done 3 sessions so far. The rustic setting is exactly what our residents have been looking for. It's authentic. It's grounding. It connects them to the agricultural heritage of the area." I stared at her. "Patricia," I said, "this is my building. This is private property. You can't just come in here and run yoga classes." Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, I understand your concern," she said. But the Wellness Committee reviewed the situation carefully. The dairy parlor is adjacent to the Oak Haven Green Space Corridor, and under the community wellness provisions of our HOA charter, we have the authority to utilize underused community assets for health and wellness programming. We're not doing any damage. We're not interfering with your farm operations. We're just using the space for an hour in the morning, 3 days a week. It's a community benefit. I felt my jaw tighten. "The dairy parlor is not a community asset," I said. "It's my private property. It's on my land. It's not part of your HOA. It's not part of your development. It's not underused. I use it for equipment storage and veterinary work and farm workshops." Patricia nodded, still smiling. "I understand that you've been using it for those purposes," she said. "But the Wellness Committee has determined that the space is suitable for community programming, and under the Oak Haven Charter, we have the authority to designate community wellness spaces within the development sphere of influence. The dairy parlor falls within that sphere." I took a deep breath. "Patricia," I said, "show me where in your charter it says you can use private property that you don't own." She opened her clipboard. She flipped through several pages. She pointed to a paragraph. "Right here," she said. "Section 14, subsection C. The Wellness Committee may identify and designate appropriate spaces within the Oak Haven community sphere for health and wellness programming, subject to committee approval and resident input." End quote. I looked at the paper. I read the paragraph. I looked back at Patricia. "This doesn't say anything about private property," I said. "This doesn't say anything about using buildings that belong to other people. This says you can designate spaces within your community. My farm is not your community." Patricia closed the clipboard. Her smile finally flickered, just a little. "Marcus, I think you're being unnecessarily difficult about this," she said. "We're not hurting anything. We're bringing people together. We're promoting health and wellness. The classes are very popular. Several residents have already paid for the full 8-week series. I would hate to have to cancel because of a misunderstanding about property boundaries." I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about my grandfather. I thought about my father. I thought about Elena. I thought about Lily. I thought about the promise I had made. "Patricia," I said, "I want you to remove your equipment from my building. I want you to cancel your classes. I want you to return the money to the people who paid. And I want you to stay off my property from now on." Patricia's smile came back, but it was different now. It was sharper. It was colder. It was the smile of someone who was used to getting what she wanted, and who had just encountered an obstacle that she intended to remove. "I'm afraid that's not going to be possible," she said. "The Wellness Committee has already approved the programming. The residents have already paid. The classes will continue as scheduled. If you have concerns, you're welcome to submit them in writing to the HOA board for review at the next monthly meeting. The next meeting is in 3 weeks. In the meantime, the Sunrise Yoga series will proceed." She turned and walked toward her Lexus. I stood there in the gravel, holding my coffee thermos, watching her drive away. I didn't argue. I didn't chase after her. I didn't raise my voice. I just walked back to my house, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I had a lot of research to do. The first thing I did was call my farm manager, a man named Tomas Rivera, who has worked with me for 8 years and who knows more about agricultural regulations than anyone I've ever met. Tomas came over that afternoon, and we sat at the kitchen table with cups of coffee and a stack of documents, and we started going through everything we could find about the dairy parlor's legal status. The dairy parlor was built in 1963, as I mentioned. It was constructed under a building permit issued by the county for agricultural use. In 1978, when the county updated its zoning ordinances, my grandfather applied for and received a private agricultural use permit that specifically designated the dairy parlor as an agricultural processing facility. The permit was renewed in 1985, and again in 1992, and again in 2001. The most recent renewal was in 2015, after my father passed away, and I took over the farm. The permit was very specific. It stated that the dairy parlor was approved for agricultural processing, equipment storage, veterinary care, and farm-related educational workshops. It explicitly prohibited commercial use, public assembly, retail sales, and any activity not directly related to agricultural operations. The permit was attached to the property deed. It ran with the land. It couldn't be changed without a formal application to the County Planning Commission, a public hearing, and an environmental review. I had known about the permit, of course. I had renewed it myself, but I had never thought about it in terms of yoga classes, because the idea of someone running yoga classes in my dairy parlor had never occurred to me. Now it was the only thing I could think about. Tomas looked at the permit, looked at me, and said, "Marcus, if she's charging money for classes in that building, she's violating the permit. And if she's violating the permit, the county can shut her down." I nodded. I pulled out my phone and started taking photos of the permit. I made copies. I put the copies in a folder. I didn't call Patricia. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't call the police. I just put the documents in the folder and waited. The next morning, the yoga class happened again. This time there were 8 cars. This time there were 31 people. This time Patricia had set up a small table near the entrance with a sign that said, "Oak Haven Wellness, Sunrise Yoga Series," and a cash box and a stack of liability waivers. I watched from the window of my tractor shed. I took photos. I noted the time. I noted the number of vehicles. I noted the license plates. I put everything in the folder. On the 3rd morning, I called the county land use office. I spoke to a woman named Diane Holloway, who had been the county land use officer for 17 years and who had helped me with the permit renewal back in 2015. I explained the situation. I told her about the yoga classes. I told her about the money. I told her about the liability waivers. I told her about Patricia Calloway and the Oak Haven Estates HOA Wellness Committee. Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Marcus, let me make sure I understand. Someone is running a commercial fitness business in an agricultural processing facility that's covered under a private use permit?" "That's correct," I said. "And they're doing it without my permission. And they're charging money? $25 per session. 47 people signed up for the series." Diane was quiet again. Then she said, "I'll be there tomorrow morning. What time do the classes start?" 6 o'clock, I said. "Sunrise session. I'll be there at 5:45, she said. "Don't tell anyone I'm coming." I didn't tell anyone. That evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Jennifer Mills, who introduced herself as Patricia Calloway's social media assistant. She wanted to know if I would be willing to be interviewed for the Oak Haven Wellness Instagram page. She said they were doing a feature on the Sunrise Yoga series, and they wanted to include a quote from the property owner about the importance of community partnerships. I told her I wasn't interested. She asked if I would reconsider. I told her no. She asked if there was anything she could do to change my mind. I told her no again and hung up. About an hour later, I got another call. This time it was from a man named Robert Chen, who said he was a resident of Oak Haven Estates and a member of the Wellness Committee. He wanted to know if I had received the information packet about the yoga series. He said the committee had voted unanimously to approve the programming and that they were excited about the partnership opportunity. I told him there was no partnership. I told him the classes were happening without my permission. I told him they needed to stop. Robert sounded confused. He said Patricia had told the committee that I had agreed to let them use the space. He said she had presented it as a done deal, a community collaboration, a bridge between the farm and the development. I told him Patricia had lied. Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think we need to have a conversation with Patricia." I told him that was a good idea. The next morning, I woke up at 4:30. I made coffee, I fed the cattle, I checked the fences. At 5:30, I walked down to the dairy parlor and waited near the gate. At 5:40, the cars started arriving. The white Subaru, the silver Prius, the black Honda, the blue Tesla, the red Mini Cooper, the gray Lexus, and 3 more cars I hadn't seen before. A green Toyota, a beige Buick, a dark blue BMW. The participants filed into the dairy parlor. They unrolled their mats. They took off their shoes. They started stretching. Patricia set up her table. She set up her cash box. She set up her sign. The yoga instructor, the blonde woman in the white leggings, took her place on the wooden platform. At 5:45, Diane Holloway's county vehicle pulled into the driveway. Diane Holloway is a woman in her early 60s, with short gray hair and steel-rimmed glasses, and a no-nonsense expression that she has perfected over nearly 2 decades of dealing with zoning violations, permit disputes, and property owners who think the rules don't apply to them. She was carrying a clipboard of her own, a thick one, with the county seal on the front, and a stack of documents clipped to the back. She was wearing a county polo shirt and khaki pants and sensible shoes. She looked like exactly what she was, a government employee who had seen everything and was not impressed by any of it. I met her at the gate. "Morning, Marcus," she said. "Is the class in session?" "Just getting started," I said. "They're all inside." Diane nodded. She walked toward the dairy parlor. I followed her. We reached the door. Diane pushed it open. The yoga class was in full swing. 34 people were arranged in rows on their mats, moving through a series of poses. The instructor was at the front, demonstrating a downward dog position. Patricia was at her table, counting money. The smell of lavender was overwhelming. Diane stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. Then she said, in a voice that was not loud but carried perfectly through the room, "Excuse me, who is in charge here?" The yoga instructor stopped mid-pose. The participants looked up. Patricia turned around. Her smile was already in place, but it faltered slightly when she saw Diane's county polo shirt and the clipboard with the official seal. "I'm Patricia Calloway," she said. "I'm the chair of the Oakhaven Estates Wellness Committee. Can I help you?" Diane walked into the room. She didn't introduce herself immediately. She just looked around, taking in the yoga mats, the cash box, the liability waivers, the sign, the wooden platform, the milking equipment, the feed charts, the veterinary supplies. Then she turned to Patricia and said, "My name is Diane Holloway. I'm the county land use officer. I'm here to conduct an inspection of this facility." Patricia's smile tightened. "An inspection?" she said. "I'm not sure I understand. This is a private wellness event. We're not doing anything that requires inspection." Diane opened her clipboard. She pulled out a copy of the agricultural use permit. She held it up so Patricia could see it. "This building is covered under a private agricultural use permit," Diane said. "The permit was issued in 1978 and renewed most recently in 2015. It designates this structure as an agricultural processing facility. It explicitly prohibits commercial use, public assembly, and any activity not directly related to agricultural operations." She paused. She looked at the yoga mats. She looked at the cash box. She looked at the sign. "Running a paid yoga class in this building is a violation of the permit," she said. "It's also a violation of county zoning ordinances, and it's a violation of state regulations governing agricultural use facilities." Patricia's smile was completely gone now. Her face had gone pale. She was gripping her clipboard so tightly that her knuckles were white. "I wasn't aware of any permit," she said. "The Wellness Committee reviewed the situation. We determined that the space was suitable for community programming. We followed our internal procedures." Diane looked at her for a long moment. "Your internal procedures don't override county regulations," she said. "Your HOA charter doesn't override state law. And your Wellness Committee doesn't have the authority to designate private agricultural facilities as community spaces." She pulled another document out of her clipboard. It was a cease and desist order. She handed it to Patricia. "This is an official notice from the County Land Use Office," Diane said. "It requires you to immediately cease all commercial activity in this building. It requires you to remove all equipment and materials associated with the yoga classes. It requires you to provide a full accounting of all fees collected from participants, and it notifies you that continued violation of the permit may result in fines of up to $500 per day, per violation." Patricia stared at the paper. Her hands were shaking. The yoga participants were watching in silence. Some of them were still in downward dog position, frozen in place, unsure what to do. The instructor had stepped down from the wooden platform and was standing off to the side, looking uncomfortable. "This is ridiculous," Patricia said. "We're not hurting anyone. We're providing a community service. We're promoting health and wellness. This is exactly the kind of bureaucratic overreach that stifles community initiatives." Diane didn't react to the speech. She just pointed to the cease and desist order. "You have 24 hours to comply," she said. "If the classes continue after that, the county will pursue enforcement action. That includes fines, legal proceedings, and potential revocation of any permits associated with this property." She turned to me. "Marcus, I'll need a copy of your permit for my records. I'll also need you to confirm in writing that you did not authorize this use of your facility." "I can do that," I said. Diane nodded. She looked around the room one more time. Then she said to no one in particular, "Class is over." The participants started gathering their mats. They started putting on their shoes. They started filing out of the dairy parlor, looking confused and embarrassed and annoyed. Some of them were muttering to each other. Some of them were looking at Patricia with expressions that were not friendly. One woman, the same gray-haired woman who had asked me if I was there for the drop-in session, stopped in front of Patricia and said, "I paid for the full 8-week series. I want my money back." Patricia didn't answer. She was still staring at the cease and desist order. The woman turned to me. "Are you the owner?" she asked. "I am," I said. "I'm sorry about this. I didn't know it was happening until a few days ago." The woman shook her head. "It's not your fault," she said. "Patricia told us she had permission. She told us it was all arranged. She told us the farm was part of the Community Wellness Partnership." She looked at Patricia again. "You lied to us, Patricia. You lied to all of us." Patricia finally looked up. Her face was red now, a deep, angry red that clashed with her pale green wellness shirt. "I didn't lie," she said. "I made a reasonable interpretation of the HOA charter. The Wellness Committee approved the programming. The space was underused. It was a community benefit. It wasn't yours to use," the woman said. She turned and walked out. The rest of the participants followed. Within 10 minutes, the dairy parlor was empty except for me, Diane, Patricia, and the yoga instructor, who was still standing awkwardly near the platform. "I'm going to need your information as well," Diane said to the instructor. "You were conducting a commercial fitness class in an unpermitted facility. That may have implications for your business license." The instructor's face went pale. "I didn't know," she said. "Patricia hired me. She told me everything was approved. She said the space was zoned for community events." Diane made a note on her clipboard. "We'll follow up with you separately," she said. "For now, I need your name, contact information, and business license number." The instructor gave her the information. Then she gathered her things and left, practically running out the door. That left me, Diane, and Patricia. Patricia was still holding the cease and desist order. She looked at me. Her expression was a mixture of anger and humiliation and something else. Something that looked almost like confusion, as if she genuinely couldn't understand how her plan had fallen apart. "You could have talked to me," she said. "You could have come to me directly. You didn't have to involve the county." "I did talk to you," I said. 3 days ago. I told you to stop. I told you to remove your equipment. I told you to cancel the classes. You told me it wasn't possible. You told me to submit my concerns in writing for the next board meeting." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I was trying to build a bridge," she said. "Between the farm and the community, between the old and the new. I was trying to create something positive. You were trying to take something that didn't belong to you," I said. "You broke into my building. You used my space without permission. You charged people money for classes on my property. You lied to your committee and your residents about having my approval. That's not building a bridge. That's trespassing." Diane closed her clipboard. "Ms. Calloway," she said, "I'm going to recommend that you consult with an attorney before you make any further statements. The county will be following up on this matter. You'll receive additional documentation in the mail. In the meantime, I suggest you focus on refunding the fees you collected and removing your equipment from this property." She turned to me. "Marcus, I'll be in touch. Let me know if she tries anything else." "I will," I said. "Thank you, Diane." Diane walked out. Patricia stood there for another moment, clutching the cease and desist order, her face cycling through emotions that I couldn't quite read. Then she turned and walked out too, without saying another word. I stood in the empty dairy parlor, surrounded by the lingering smell of lavender and sweat, and I felt something that I hadn't felt in days: relief. But the story wasn't over. The aftermath was just beginning. Over the next week, the situation unraveled completely. The first thing that happened was the refunds. Patricia had collected over $4,000 in fees from 47 residents who had signed up for the 8-week Sunrise Yoga series. When the classes were canceled, those residents wanted their money back. But Patricia didn't have the money. She had already spent a significant portion of it on marketing materials, the yoga instructor's deposit, liability insurance, and what she described as administrative expenses related to the wellness initiative. The residents were not sympathetic to her administrative expenses. They wanted their money. They started complaining to the HOA board. They started posting on the Oak Haven Estates community Facebook page. They started showing up at Patricia's house. The HOA board held an emergency meeting. I wasn't there, but I heard about it from Robert Chen, the wellness committee member who had called me earlier. He told me that the meeting was chaotic. Patricia tried to defend her actions. She argued that she had acted in good faith. She argued that the wellness committee had approved the programming. She argued that the dairy parlor was a community asset under the HOA charter. The board was not convinced. They pointed out that the HOA charter did not authorize the use of private property without the owner's consent. They pointed out that Patricia had misrepresented the situation to the committee and to the residents. They pointed out that the county's cease and desist order had created significant legal exposure for the HOA. By the end of the meeting, Patricia had resigned from her position as chair of the wellness committee. The board voted to dissolve the wellness committee entirely and to conduct a full audit of its finances. They also voted to reimburse the residents who had paid for the yoga series, using funds from the HOA's general reserve. The reimbursement came with a letter of apology from the board, which explicitly stated that the yoga classes had been organized without proper authorization and that the HOA regretted the inconvenience caused to residents. The second thing that happened was the cleanup. Patricia had left a significant amount of equipment in the dairy parlor. Yoga mats, blocks, straps, bolsters, the wooden platform, the table, the cash box, the sign, and a portable sound system that she had used for the instructor's microphone. She didn't come back to get any of it. I sent her a certified letter requesting that she remove her property within 7 days. She didn't respond. I sent a second letter. Still no response. Finally, I contacted the HOA board and informed them that if the equipment wasn't removed within 48 hours, I would consider it abandoned property and dispose of it accordingly. The board sent a maintenance crew to remove the equipment the next day. They also sent a cleaning crew to scrub the lavender smell out of the concrete floor. And they sent a locksmith to replace the padlock on the dairy parlor door, because it turned out that Patricia had obtained a key by telling the HOA maintenance supervisor that she had my permission to access the building for wellness programming preparation. The HOA paid for all of it. The cleanup, the lock replacement, the equipment removal. The total cost was just under $3,000, which the board added to the growing list of expenses that Patricia's wellness initiative had generated. The third thing that happened was the social media fallout. Jennifer Mills, Patricia's social media assistant, had already posted several photos and videos from the yoga classes on the Oak Haven Wellness Instagram page. The posts showed smiling residents in yoga poses, with captions about rustic sunrise serenity and connecting with the agricultural heritage of our community. After the cease and desist order, the comments section turned ugly. Residents who had paid for the series demanded refunds. Other residents criticized the HOA for overstepping its authority. Some people defended Patricia, arguing that she had good intentions and that the farmer was being unreasonable. But most of the comments were negative. The posts were eventually deleted, but not before someone took screenshots and shared them on the county's community Facebook page, where they generated several hundred comments and a lot of local attention. The fourth thing that happened was the legal follow-up. Diane Holloway, the county land use officer, filed a formal report documenting the permit violation. The report was sent to the county attorney's office for review. The attorney determined that while the violation was serious, it had been promptly addressed and no further enforcement action was necessary, provided that no additional violations occurred. However, the attorney also noted that Patricia Calloway could potentially face civil liability for trespassing, fraud, and misrepresentation, depending on whether any of the affected residents chose to pursue legal action. As far as I know, no one did. Most of the residents just wanted their money back and to forget the whole thing had ever happened. The fifth thing that happened was the quiet aftermath. Patricia Calloway sold her house in Oak Haven Estates about 4 months after the yoga incident. I heard from Robert Chen that she moved to a different development in a different county, where she presumably started over with a new wellness committee and a new clipboard and a new set of plans that probably didn't involve trespassing on private agricultural property. The HOA board implemented new policies requiring written verification of property ownership and zoning compliance before any community programming could be approved. They also sent a formal letter of apology to me, acknowledging that the HOA had overstepped its authority and assuring me that it would not happen again. I accepted the apology. I didn't hold a grudge. I understood that Patricia had misled a lot of people, including her own committee members and the HOA board. The residents who had been caught up in the scheme were victims too, in a way. They had paid for a service that was never legitimate, and they had been embarrassed in front of their neighbors, and they had learned a hard lesson about trusting people who speak with too much confidence and too little documentation. As for me, I went back to my farm. I went back to my cattle, I went back to my hayfields and my equipment, and my early mornings with black coffee and the sound of gravel under my boots. The dairy parlor is still there. It's still locked. It's still used for equipment storage and veterinary work, and the occasional 4-H meeting. The lavender smell is completely gone now, replaced by the familiar scents of hay and diesel and cattle supplement. Lily asked me about the yoga classes once, a few weeks after everything was over. She had heard about it from a friend whose parents lived in Oak Haven Estates. She wanted to know if it was true that people had been doing yoga in Grandpa's old milking parlor. I told her it was true. She laughed for about 5 minutes straight. Then she asked me if I was going to put up a sign. I asked her what kind of sign. She said, "A sign that says no yoga." I thought about it for a moment. Then I said, "I don't think we need a sign. I think the word got around." And it had. The story of the yoga classes in the dairy parlor became something of a local legend. People in town still mention it sometimes, usually with a smile or a shake of the head. The farmer who stood up to the HOA, the wellness chairwoman who didn't read the permit, the sunrise yoga session that ended with a county land use officer saying, "Class is over." I still have the folder. It's in my filing cabinet, right next to the agricultural use permit and the deed to the farm, and my grandfather's handwritten ledger books. It contains everything: the photos of the yoga mats, the notes about the license plates, the copy of the cease and desist order, the certified letters, the HOA's apology, the county's report. It's not a thick folder. It doesn't need to be. The important documents were always the ones that were already there, the ones that my grandfather and my father and I had maintained for decades, the ones that proved that this farm was ours, and that no HOA wellness committee could change that. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I take the folder out and look through it. Not because I'm still angry. I'm not. Not because I'm still worried. I'm not. I look through it because it reminds me of something important. It reminds me that the people who speak with the most confidence are not always the people who are right. It reminds me that paperwork matters, that documentation matters, that the truth is usually written down somewhere, if you're willing to look for it. And it reminds me that sometimes the best response to someone who thinks they can take what's yours is not to argue, not to fight, not to scream. Sometimes the best response is to wait, to document, to prepare, and then to let the facts speak for themselves. Patricia Calloway thought she could turn my dairy parlor into a yoga studio because she believed her authority was bigger than my property rights. She believed her clipboard was more powerful than my deed. She believed her wellness initiative was more important than my family's history. She was wrong. And on a gray morning in early spring, with the sun just starting to rise over the valley and the smell of lavender still hanging in the air, she found out exactly how wrong she was. I finished my coffee, I closed the folder. I put it back in the filing cabinet. Outside, the cattle were lowing in the east pasture. The hayfields were green with new growth. The farm was quiet and peaceful, and exactly the way it was supposed to be. I walked out onto the porch and stood there for a moment looking out at the land that my grandfather had bought in 1958, the land that my father had worked for 40 years, the land that I was going to pass on to my daughter someday. It was still ours. It had always been ours, and no one was ever going to take it away. Not with a clipboard, not with a yoga mat, not with a smile and a speech about community wellness. The dairy parlor door was locked. The padlock was new. The key was in my pocket. And somewhere, in a different county, Patricia Calloway was probably starting over with a new plan and a new clipboard and a new set of people who didn't yet know what she was capable of. I hoped, for their sake, that they read the permits. I hoped they checked the zoning. I hoped they asked the right questions before they let her into their buildings. Because if they didn't, they were going to learn the same lesson that Patricia learned. The lesson that my grandfather knew, and my father knew, and I know now too. The lesson that the farm use permit taught the HOA. You can't just take what isn't yours. You can't just use what you don't own. And you can't build a wellness empire on a foundation of trespassing and lies. The sun was fully up now. The valley was golden with morning light. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down on the porch steps. It was going to be a good day, a quiet day, a day of work and weather and the simple rhythms of farm life. And if anyone ever tried to put a yoga mat in my dairy parlor again, I knew exactly what to do. I would open the folder, I would make the call, and I would let the county handle the rest.